Hello, this is Peter Solie, candidate for the Kansas House of Representatives, 109th District. This is a short video about national debt. You may say, what in the world is a person running for the Kansas House of Representatives speaking about national debt? I am passionate about the 10th Amendment. The states must exercise their right to retain the control over issues and policies and programs. If you please go to my website, Peter Solie, that's how you spell it right there, petersolie.com. I have on there a national debt crisis tab that will, in more detail, explain what I'm going to do here in the next 2 or 3 minutes. In short, this is the really short version. The federal budget is currently growing at $1 trillion every 100 days. Unsustainable. I believe it's immoral. And the politicians that have been in Washington, D.C. for 100 years have not been able to control their spending habit. They need to go to rehab, and my plan is rehab. Essentially, it's a constitutional budget, the things that are outlined in the Constitution, and in very round numbers, maybe that's 1.5 or 2 billion or $2 trillion. The rest of everything that Washington spends would be transferred to the states. The states would decide exactly how they want to implement housing, how they want to implement transportation. They can make those choices. They can cooperate, certainly with transportation. They can cooperate with other states. Doesn't mean that we wouldn't be able to move from one state to another in a seamless manner, just like we do now. But it means we wouldn't transfer that money to Washington, allow them to launder their 15% or whatever it is, and then send it back with instructions on exactly what we need to do in order to recapture that money. So that would be the federal budget. And I believe through a constitutional amendment, it would be tied to a percentage of the GDP. To strip that away, they would just go back to adding more and more things that are so essential that we can't live without them. I don't believe that's a good plan. So if it were tied to a percentage of the GDP, then they would have to decide what's really important, because that would be the cap that they could collect and spend. They would not be able to go into debt other than for an act of war, defense of the country, and that would have to be very short-term debt. And it would have to be, perhaps they would have to vote on it every 6 months. Yes, we're still at war, and therefore we can continue to have some form of debt. Otherwise, they would need to have a balanced budget. Social Security would be its own budget with its own source of income, and it must pay for itself. Now, I wouldn't implement dramatic cuts either for those that are currently collecting Social Security or for those who are nearing retirement, and I don't know what that means. Let's say 20 years. For those who have 20 or more years of work, they could elect to stay in what we currently know as Social Security. They would continue to have FICA withdrawn from their check. And that would very quickly go into, it's already in debt, but we're told that it would become insolvent in about 10 years. Well, if we have a lot of people who are now collecting Social Security and younger people are not contributing, there would be a nationwide tax for everybody, for those who participate, for those who don't. Top of my head guess, 3% of say an income tax. And that tax would fund the payments to people in Social Security. It would go wildly in debt. That debt would balloon. But after 50 or 60 years, the bulk of people on Social Security would be aging out of the system. They would die, and there would still be that debt there, but everyone is paying this 3% tax to retire the Social Security debt. Let's say in 80 years, the Social Security debt is zero, the tax goes away. Constitutionally, it goes away. It would have to take another constitutional amendment, not just a passage of Congress, but a constitutional amendment to reinstitute some form of tax of that nature. For those who have more than 20 years before they retire, I'm not sure what that number would be. I'm simply using it as an example. They would have an election. Am I going to stay with new Social Security? New Social Security would take the FICA payments as it does now. That would build up. It would really build up because there wouldn't be anybody participating with the exception of people with disabilities. There wouldn't be any new people in that new Social Security system. But the actuaries would, by law, they must have a system that pays for the benefits. And if they get it wrong, the people who participate in that program would either need to take a cut in benefit, or there would need to be an increase in the FICA payment. You can't go to the federal government and say, hey, we need more money. It must be designed to control, or control's the wrong word, to pay for itself. I could elect to be part of a private retirement system. As a libertarian, part of that I don't like, but you must participate in a private retirement system, or you must participate in new Social Security, or you must participate in existing Social Security. The idea that you just are choosing not to participate in any way simply would not be an option. If I elected to participate in a private system, I would have an expectation that my employer would contribute in the way that my employer does to FICA, but I wouldn't require it by law. Why would I go work for such an employer? If they're willing to pay 7% towards FICA expenses for employees that choose that option, I would expect them to also honor a similar payment towards my private retirement. But I wouldn't require it by law. My guess is almost all employers would do that because you need to attract employees. The marketplace would make that determination. I would do essentially, with Social Security, if I elected a private retirement system, I must also have a disability insurance of some kind. That is one of the parts of Social Security, and if I elected the private system, I would have to purchase a private disability insurance of some kind, and those would become readily available to me. Whether they would be affordable or not is a different question, but we can't have a huge swath of people those who participate in Social Security have a disability system and insurance. And so, again, as a libertarian at my core, that should be my choice. In part, I'm willing to agree that if I choose a private path, I must. That's in order to move this forward. I would duplicate that system for Medicare. So people who are currently retired, people who are nearing retirement, they have paid in. They can just continue on with that system. The entire population. And again, it doesn't have to be an income tax. It could be a sales tax. It could be a fee system. It could be a percentage of every medical bill and exchange. There's a Medicare tax that everybody has to pay when they purchase medicine or when they see a doctor. I'm not proposing the specifics of how do we come up with this money that would support the current people on Medicare, the new people who would come into, new as in short-term new, people like me. I'm still working, but I've only got probably 6 or 7 years in my work life. I will go on to Medicare when I retire. I've paid into it for 40 years. Once I'm in that system, I pay some amount every month. I don't know what it is. But again, that debt would expand, it would balloon. The current Medicare debt, the unfunded liability is, I'm looking at the debt clock, $41 trillion. That's going to get a lot bigger. It's going to get a lot bigger under the current plan. When's the last time you heard a politician in Washington, D.C. say anything other than this is a problem and not here is the solution to the problem? I am proposing, at least in principle, a solution to the problem. The whole population would pay off that 41 trillion plus the additional debt that would be accrued during the transition period. People on new Medicare would pay into the system, but it would be a system that must pay for itself. The actuary must be honest. If this is the benefit you want, then this is what you've got to pay as a premium. I could elect to go into new Medicare. Not me. I'm going to stay with old Medicare because I'm so near retirement. My daughter could elect to go into new Medicare, or she could look at the marketplace and select a program that over the 40 years of her work experience, she's going to pay into. That would then contribute, or it wouldn't contribute, it would be her retirement health care. She might have to continue to pay a premium after retirement. People on Medicare do that. But I must participate in either private Medicare, new Medicare, or existing Medicare. We're not going to leave a class of people who just say, no, I don't want this coverage. So that's 5 different budgets: a constitutional U.S. budget, a current Social Security, new Social Security, current Medicare, new Medicare, and the 6th budget would be the debt. According to the debt clock, the current debt is almost $35 trillion. It has to end. Under this proposal, again, everyone would participate in an income tax, a sales tax. Someone, probably not the Congress, but probably a constitutional convention would decide, how is this going to be solved? And you could not add to that national debt. My guess is there would be a lot of pushing things into the national debt during the 1 or 2 years that all of this is being negotiated and organized. Things like student loan debt. You can hear it right now. You can say, oh, that needs to get pushed into long-term debt. We're going to forgive student loans for all these people. It's wrong. It shouldn't happen. But if it allowed us to come to here's the national debt, and we are going to pay it off over a 40-year period, we now have stable Social Security, whether it's old Social Security or new stable Social Security or private retirement savings. We have stable health care for retirees. We have stable projected health care for retirees, whether that be new Medicare or private health insurance. And we have a constitutional budget that must be balanced, that is limited in scope to those things which are in the Constitution. Now it goes to the states. I would argue that the states should do the exact same thing. They should push these programs to counties, let the counties determine what housing assistance, if any, is needed in my county. And when it's a federal program, there's one way. We build a living unit, we have some form of income verification, and if you meet that qualification, and here's the part I don't like, if you meet the qualification and we have a space for you, This idea that we provide housing, but the list is so long that you're never going to get in that housing, that's wrong. Don't say that we have a housing program if we don't actually do it. I believe that in principle, I don't have any staff, I don't have attorneys, I don't have analysts. I have a principled proposal. 6 budgets, all with 6 different income sources. A constitutional budget, new Social Security, old Social Security, old Medicare, new Medicare, the national debt. 6 budgets. Everything else goes to the states. It is I am very much of the opinion that other than the paying off of the debt, this should be revenue neutral. There should be, I would want a constitutional amendment for Kansas, for the Kansas Constitution, that my debt or my tax responsibility would be equal to or less than what my tax responsibility is in 2024. So if it's as a total, sales taxes, state income tax, national income tax, gas taxes, all of these taxes, if that's for me is 35%, then after all of these changes take place, my tax burden is still 35%. I believe in certain states it will be less because we don't have to launder the money in Washington, D.C. We learn to live within our budgets. We learn to say, you can do that yourself. You don't need to go to Washington, D.C. to fund that bridge. Think about building a bridge. What we do is we spend hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars flying politicians to Washington, D.C. to lobby. Let's lobby, let's lobby, let's lobby, let's plan, let's plan. Just decide you want to do it and build the bridge. And if you're capturing 42 cents per gallon of gas and there should be other transportation sources of income, rather than keeping or having 21 cents of Kansas sales tax on fuel and 21 cents or whatever the number is for federal fuel tax. If you captured that yourself, you would be able to make that determination. Now we would have politicians going from Ellsworth County, Kansas to Topeka, Kansas to lobby for, we want our part of that now 42 cents that you've collected. That sense of lobbying is still going to go on, but it's much easier for me to have an impact in Topeka, Kansas than it is for me to have an impact in Washington, D.C. I will continue to make videos to explain these in more detail. I simply believe it is immoral to continue to print money. The inflation that we have just seen will get even worse if you say we can't afford a 3% tax to fund the national debt and pay it to zero. Explain to me how the 6, 10, 12% inflation that we are going to see very soon is somehow affordable. If we have budgets that pay off our debt, if we have a national budget that is locked in, the National Defense, Secretary of State, or the State Department, the Treasury, all of the necessary functions of the federal government are in that, are in the Constitution, and as a percentage of GDP, we would allow that to be funded. The percentage of GDP is simply to reduce we need a new program. If we need a new program, then convince the legislature in Kansas that we need a new program. Don't convince Congress. Convince legislatures in the 50 states, convince the governors, convince the people of those states that that is what's needed. Thank you. Please go to my website. I'll go up again, petersolie.com. There is a tab there, National Debt Crisis. I have other positions that I certainly hope you take a look at. My district is in north central Kansas. It is Ellsworth, Lincoln, Russell, Osborne, and Smith counties. And that election is November 5th, 2024. I will be on the November ballot. I encourage and welcome your vote. I certainly encourage your donation. Running a campaign like this is very expensive, and I would love to have your support. Thank you.